Going into the final round of the Norway chess tournament, Sergei Karjakin led the field, but he was playing against Fabiano Caruana, just half a point behind. If Caruana could beat him, then of course he would win the tournament. And there was also Magnus Carlsen just a half a point behind Karjakin. If he could defeat his compatriot Simon Agdestein, then Carlsen would have a shot of winning the tournament. Let's look at that game first. Carlsen, with the white pieces, has built up quite a nice position. You can see his knight is lurking around black's king. It's also, he's threatening to move that rook down the board, attacking black's queen, and it's a really threatening position, and maybe in combination with the queen coming down here. Looks very promising for Magnus. But Agdestein defended well. He played his rook over to parry that threat. Now that does allow the knight to take the pawn with check. You can see that's pinned. But Carlsen didn't do this. A really interesting decision. Everyone watching was just assuming that he would take this pawn. But he judged that probably black would have enough activity with his queen here to perhaps hold the game. Instead, Carlsen very typically kept more control in the position. He played a very subtle move. He just nudged his king over. Well, first of all, we can see that if rook takes rook, then knight check will fork king and queen. The queen is gone. So black has to wait. So Agdestein brought his king over. Now Carlsen exchanged, and we can see the point to bringing the king over. The king covers the entry squares of the queen, so preventing any counterplay. And now Agdestein has to wait passively, because you can see that queen would love to come in on one of these squares. So Agdestein just covers those squares with his queen. Okay, then, well, Carlsen just waits for a few moves. He's starting the squeeze on black's position. You know, he's just seeing if Agdestein is going to crack. But actually, Agdestein defended well. He brought his king over. He's trying to get it away from that knight. So Carlsen just builds up slowly. It's very impressive how he manages to lock this knight out of the game, actually. You can see, obviously, it can't move to these squares and come over. Okay, the king moves over. I think this is a good manoeuvre. And now Carlsen manoeuvred the knight to a better square. Now that the king is away, the knight wants to perform a different task, and that is to tie black down to defending this pawn. Good manoeuvre. And now after the game, Agdestein said, well, I thought I could probably wait with the king and just shuffle back and forth. But Carlsen wasn't convinced. He thought that he would still be able to gain play on this side of the board by advancing his a-pawn supported by the queen. But it's hard to say whether black could hold a draw there, but it would have been a chance. Instead, Agdestein broke out with his pawn. Very typical of Agdestein's style. He is an active player. He doesn't like to wait passively. But Magnus had this one under control. So he brought his king over and then brought his knight over. You can see that now that this pawn has advanced, this pawn is potentially a little bit weaker. So Carlsen massing with his pieces on the queen side, but there's no breakthrough as yet. But again, more patient shuffling from Agdestein. He brought his knight here, so there's now pressure on this pawn, and also that frees the way for the queen to come here. Now here, it's very tough defending. After the game, Agdestein said that he had just had no energy left. He couldn't think. Perhaps he should have defended this pawn here and just sat tight, but it's very difficult to know whether, you know, a move like this is going to be good for white, but probably black could have a defence there. Instead, Agdestein took this pawn off, exchanged pawns, but this is now looking good for white. So a check from Carlsen. In this case, the queen's entry into black's position is extremely dangerous. Agdestein advanced this pawn, And now the queen came here. Excellent move. So that means that the queen defends the pawn, but also attacks this one. Agdestein tried to defend with the king. Now, if the queen takes here, then the queen is shut out by the knight. And then maybe black has a chance to take here, and so on. But Carlsen was alert to the danger. He played his knight in first. So the queen maintains defence of that pawn. The white queen threatens this pawn here, but also, crucially, the knight can join in the attack. Queen and knight are a very potent attacking force. So, for example, if the knight comes back, then the white knight goes in and white wins the knight. Okay, a check from Agdestein. The king came back here. It's completely safe. And now there's simply no decent defence. The queen checked. Now Carlsen moves in for the kill. If this knight is taken, then queen takes pawn, and, well, this king and pawn ending is completely winning with an extra pawn. Here's the crucial move. The pawn blocks out black's king, and then the king and pawn slowly advance up the board. Easy win for white. Instead, Agdestein played here, but now it's completely lost. Checks with the queen, and it's going to be mate. In fact, here Agdestein resigned. If the king comes here, it's mate in one move with queen b4. If the king comes here, then, well, there are loads of ways to win, but here's one possible way, and now the only defence to the check is to put the queen in the way, and of course that's taken by the knight. So, a very typical Carlsonian victory, actually. I love the way he squeezed the position and just got the maximum out of it. Very fine manoeuvring there. But I have to feel sorry for Agdestein, who really played an excellent tournament but just ran out of energy in his final 2 games. Okay, that meant, this victory of Carlsen's meant that if Caruana won, or the game was a draw, then Carlsen would share first. Well, let's take a look. Caruana against Karjakin, the crucial game. And this was the last finish. Here, I like Caruana's position. He played his bishop in. You can see that with these pawns, he controls the centre. And he's starting to build up nice pressure on the c-file. Now, there is a passed pawn here that's protected. But white seems to be doing well here. Here, for example, I think he should play his knight into e4. And this looks very strong. You can see how white dominates this c-file. Let me show you one particular variation. This is nice. So bishop takes bishop, rook takes, and the rook comes in to attack this pawn. Now, if the rook defends, here's a beautiful move. Now white can attack on the king side. If this is taken, then another pawn sacrifice. If this is taken, the knight checks. You can see while black is tied down so passively, then white can break through, and now queen c2 threatens a checkmate. Now, of course, that is not forced, but I think it shows after knight e4 how this knight is able to switch over to the king side. It's very powerful. Instead, Caruana played the knight the other way. I think the problem is, okay, although the knight attacks the pawn, not a bad idea, I think this is a somewhat one-dimensional move. Karjakin exchanged and then moved his queen into the counter-attack. Now Caruana was running short of time, and it's a difficult position to hold together. I'm sure white is okay here, but suddenly he's got to defend against the attack to the knight, the attack to this pawn. His king is somewhat exposed. It would have been better to have, you can see, the pawn advances can be strong, but the second rank is exposed, and maybe this pawn is weak as well. So it's now suddenly tricky to control the position, and I think Karjakin exploited these weaknesses very well. The knight came back to protect the pawn. Now this pawn advanced. The queen came up to attack the pawn, and this pawn advanced again. And now rook takes pawn. Okay, well, it looks as though white has achieved something, but the point is rook c8 comes, attacking the knight. So Caruana has to defend by blocking with the rook. This was exchanged, and then queen here. So Karjakin is able to pick up this pawn. Can't be defended because of the threats, the pin on the knight. Caruana gave this up in order to free his queen. Now they'd reached the time control, but you can see, although material is still level, this advanced passed pawn supported by bishop and queen is really dangerous. Obviously ties white's queen and knight down to the defence. But this is a horrible position. I mean, let's just see what happens if white waits, let's say with a king move. Well, then black can offer an exchange of queens, and this ending is horrible. The knight has to stay blockading the pawn, and this is another problem. These pawns are all on dark squares, and of course vulnerable to attack by the bishop, and white's king is just tied to defending that pawn, so black must be winning. So if Caruana has to avoid queen trades the whole time, he must be lost here. So you can see Karjakin just wants to trade queens there. So Caruana tried a desperate last counterattack by moving in with his knight, but the queen swoops in, taking pawns, and really this was very easy to parry. The queen defends the bishop, and really this counterattack is going nowhere if black defends carefully, and Karjakin was alert to the danger. Obviously exchanging queens here with queen f6 will allow the a pawn to go through. Caruana took here, and now the pin is very nasty. A check, but queen there forces an exchange of queens, because obviously the knight can be taken as well. So here Caruana actually resigned. So there we go. Sergei Karjakin wins the tournament with 6 points clear. Magnus Carlsen was second with 5.5, and Grishuk was third on his own with 5. He managed to defeat Kramnik in the last round. Kramnik had a miserable end to the tournament, scoring half out of 4. I think psychologically he was really shot through after his loss against Topalov. After the tournament, Magnus said, I played pretty well, but I never really got going, and I missed my chance yesterday. Of course, he had a great chance to defeat Svidler. Sergei Karjakin was, of course, very happy. He said, I'm very tired, but I'm really happy. This, of course, was a repeat of last year's result. Karjakin also won last year in the Norway chess tournament, and Carlsen was also second. So, congratulations to Sergei Karjakin on a brilliant tournament, and it was a fantastic event, some tremendous games. I do hope you've all enjoyed watching the games and these reports, and of course we look forward to the next great chess event in Norway, which will be the Chess Olympics, which will take place in Tromsø in August. Thanks very much for watching.